back to another Space XPLR episode. We have a very, very special guest on today. As you know, we have these amazing guests, all who are related in space exploration related industries across the board. So today we have a very special guest. His name is Myles Harris. So Myles is currently a PhD student at University College London, Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction. Myles is researching a prolonged field care, healthcare, in remote environments in space. Myles is collaborating with the nonprofit organization Remote Area Risk International and the Ministry of Defense, Royal Center for Defense Medicine. And again, as I asked Myles before, he said the best way for you to get in contact with him is going to be through Twitter, which of course, that link is going to be in the show notes. So with no longer further ado, Myles, I really appreciate you coming on today to this episode.
Great, I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to connect. So here we go. So I mean, going through PhD, so that was kind of behind the scenes. I asked him how does that go in, so far. He said it goes well. So for the people who are looking from that kind of educational standpoint to pursue something, let's say a PhD, and maybe you can give with that your personal background. How did you started your personal journey? How hard is that for somebody to start?
PhD is obviously quite hard and quite challenging, but that can be something to really enjoy. So my background, my bachelor's degree was nursing, so I'm a nurse by background, and my master's was in education. So that's my academic background. But of course, you don't have to do a master's degree to do a PhD. You can go straight from being an undergraduate to doctorate level. I think it's worth mentioning the difference between a PhD and a doctorate, because not many people recognize that. The PhD is very much focused on the theoretical exploration of a topic, whereas a doctorate is practically researching something. So it very much depends what you want to do with a PhD or a doctorate.
Got it. So how did you come across, this, Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction? Because you went very specific, so how do you, how does their thought kind of, and decision-making process works behind that? How did you pick this particular institute and, specifically this education that you're going through right now?
Well, I had an idea for a research project I wanted to work on. So my rough plan was to combine nursing, education, and which is mountaineering, and doing those three things research projects. And the rationale for that is providing expedition medic care during a mountaineering expedition or other pre-hospital settings. That there's not much literature and evidence and training about how to look after someone for a long period of time in a remote environment. It's very much focused on acute medical emergencies. So I was thinking, not having that literature to base clinical practice on increase the risk of disasters. So I was looking about where to do a PhD, and I went along to UCL Postgraduate Open Evening and found the UCL Institute of Risk and Disaster Reduction, and the rest is history, as they say.
Nice. So the history still goes from here. The history is being written right now while we're talking. So again, talking about that again, can you go in a little bit more in detail? Because again, I've seen some posts on your Instagram again about astronauts on Mars mission, and the way that we're going to be talking about risk reduction or things like that. So can you explain to the people what your personal process, what you're going through, and why is that important?
Well, obviously my background is mountaineering and operating clinically in that environment. And as I was going through my literature review and I was doing a concept analysis as part of my PhD, space kept coming up. And obviously my focus is providing healthcare in very remote environments. And space is the remotest environment that you could possibly think of. So that's what led me to space medicine and applying the research in a space context. And as you say, it's really exciting. History is still being written through everyone's work. It's being focused on space.
Got it. So, okay. So going in a little bit more in details, how does risk and disaster reduction, what type of risk and disaster reduction are we talking about?
So at the moment, when people train to be a healthcare practitioner, so whether that's a doctor, a nurse, a paramedic, allied health professional, they're obviously specialists in their fields. So my background is adult nursing. So my training was very much focused on looking after people that are aged 18 and above. Although I did have some experience of looking after children and people with mental health needs, I'm definitely more in a comfort zone looking after an adult patient. But in a remote environment, and particularly in space, there's very limited number of people that will be going there and are there at the moment. So a healthcare provider needs to have the capability of providing interdisciplinary healthcare. So if that's a doctor, not being only to provide medical care, and being able to provide nursing care, first aid, mental health, and that's really what the focus is. And without having that focus, again, as I mentioned, increases the risk of disaster happening in those remote environments. And by definition of being in a remote environment, if a small incident or a small disaster happens, it can get worse much, much more quickly. So that's kind of one of the driving forces of the research that I'm doing.
So what type of scenarios are we talking about, those disaster scenarios? So we're talking somebody who's, let's say has, broken a leg or an arm, or we're talking about flu, or what type of disaster scenarios are we talking about?
There's almost an unlimited answer to that. I mean, that's a good example when you're
Worst
saying
case,
about...
let's say worst case.
Worst case, I could kind of group that together. I mean, you can use that an example that you said about having a broken leg. So mountaineering, if I broke my leg in the Himalayas, most expedition medics would be able to look after me and my broken leg in that instance. If I can't be evacuated for 3 days because of bad weather, from that period of time, there's a lot of care needs that I would need as someone with a broken leg, because I can't move. So that's here on Earth, but in space, it's even a bigger risk, because if we're on the moon, or ultimately where we're all going is Mars, it's a very, very long journey back. And so for Mars, it's 7 months there, 7 months back approximately. So a very rapid aeromedical evacuation is not an option. So that's the worst case scenario that we're thinking about. Our research is looking at how do we mitigate that risk from happening and promoting the health of people, both physically and psychologically, while they're in that remote environment such as space.
So the question is, sorry, can we mitigate the risk before actually we take off and land on Mars and start colonizing Mars and, let's say, creating moon bases? Is there some ways to mitigate risk, let's say, to increase the level of our personal health, so before we go, and make sure that, those type of scenarios, and let's say from a military perspective, maybe so there's some education involved with that. What is the ways that we can prepare before we're going to go there?
You're absolutely right, and the short answer is yes. And really what you've described is the philosophy of disaster risk reduction. Because disaster risk reduction is all about mitigating a risk that we know about, or something that could happen, to reduce the risk of that having a negative impact. And that's a movement away from disaster risk management, which is managing something that's already happened. Now, clearly we need both things, because if a disaster does happen in space, then we need to be able to manage it. But it makes a lot of sense to invest time, effort, and systematic inquiry into assessing those risks that could happen, and then practicing mitigating them here on Earth. And then ultimately that reduces the risk of disaster happening in space.
So let's say, again, let's take an example, as I mentioned, that kind of broken leg kind of scenario. How could that be resolved, let's say, on Mars? Those type of situations, how can be done? Is there going to be surgical type approach? How people are planning to go about those situations?
So this is definitely one of the things I'm looking at in my PhD. So at the moment, what could happen is that person would need immediate medical care, which would be able to do. But then there's a period of when that person needs to have time to rest and recover, so that broken leg can heal. So there's prolonged care then, which really associates with nursing care and other professionals as well. But then not forgetting that there's also psychological care as well in that environment. And we know that that's a potential risk, because being in a remote environment, if something goes wrong, it's not only people's physical health that can be a problem, it's their psychology as well. So there's a lot of other researchers and practitioners that are looking at this concept of psychological health in remote environments. And really what my research is doing is pulling all those things together, and I'm developing a theory that will be able to be applied in remote environments such as space, to inform an interdisciplinary healthcare practitioner to be able to meet the patient's needs while they're in that environment, such as Mars, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So that research is still continuing. We're halfway through that research personally right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a big project to do. It has to take a lot of time. But as I say, I'm nearly halfway through, and I've made good progress so far.
Got it, got it. So leave a comment down below again if you're watching for YouTube or in YouTube or listening on the podcast, saying good luck to this man, to Myles, because I mean he's working on some great stuff that is, of course, you know, you're working on that from a personal perspective and your personal kind of need and want, you know, why you do this. But again, you're making an impact for a lot of people, and you're leaving that kind of footprint for the rest of the people to follow you, you know, as well. So I think you know, just sending some good luck always helps. So again, I want to ask you about kind of creating, so if we go back to the situation, again, of a broken leg, for instance, how having, let's say, less of a gravity or kind of being in a zero-G environment will affect kind of the healing process?
That's a really good question. And being in a low gravity or zero gravity environment is a big risk. Because obviously, if we don't have gravity, then we can have muscular and skeletal atrophy. So bones become more brittle. So there's a lot of research, particularly on the International Space Station, about how much exercise would somebody need to do to be able to maintain their bone density and their muscle mass as well. And what's been interesting developments recently is that we don't need to be in a constant with a gravity environment. Because if we think about it, during just you and I, a normal day, for most of the day when we're awake, we're standing up or sitting down. So the pressure on our bones is slightly greater then. But then as we go to sleep, the pressure on our bones is kind of neutral. We're lying horizontal. So there's a theory at the moment that's being tested about whether we don't need to be in a gravity environment all the time, just some of the time. That's a really interesting question, I think.
So when we're talking about testing, I mean, where those tests are happening? Are we talking about ISS, or those tests are happening on ground? How much of that, you know, or research are we putting in practice right now to make sure that we can make those, you know, mitigating risk, you know, things, you know, in the future before we're going to go to Mars?
So ISS is one place where that kind of research is being done, and the space agencies that have a presence there. But also in some analog missions, so in doing centrifuge experiments or parabolic flights, those sort of situations are where those questions are being asked.
Got it. Okay. So besides that, I mean, how much we should focus on, because I know from a personal like perspective, I've seen that you know the requirements from health perspective is very kind of, you know, there's a high demand on that, because I mean, you know, you have to be very fit physically for you to at least, you know, before of course, if we want to colonize Mars, that threshold has to be lowered. If you want to take 1,000 people or whatever X amount of people on the Mars, it has to be lowered from a health maybe perspective. But talking about the mental health, because I had some of the podcasts, you know, great people on my podcast prior to yourself, where they talked about, and they're working on the Mars colonization projects. And we came to the kind of conclusion, the main topic was, it's not about technology, not about resources, capital, you know, not being available. And of course, there's a lot of rules and regulations that kind of, you know, stopped us or slow us from making those like Mars colonization projects happening. There's a little bit delay in that. But there is also a delay in our mental kind of, you know, toughness or mental perspective, the way we look at things. Because when we're talking about 1,000 people, or let's even 5 people, let's say talking about analog missions, which of course we have those people on as well. If we're talking 5, 6 people, you can get a lot of fraction between 5, 6 people. And we're talking about 1,000 people, there's going to be hate, love, marriages, probably murder. I mean, we're talking about massacre, right? It could be the worst case scenario. And we're talking about the environment where you cannot go outside, and, you know, it's kind of COVID. So hopefully COVID will prepare us for more of that kind of in-house environment as well. But from a mental perspective, like, what is the ways that we're working on to mitigate the risk of like injuries and, you know, those disasters happen?
I think that's a really good point, and we don't necessarily have the answers yet, but I think we do have a way of working that out. And one of the areas that I think would be very important to answer those very important questions is anthropology. So anthropology is obviously looking at the different cultures, study of culture. And the Martian culture is a very interesting concept because it's something that kind of unifies humanity as one thing. So anthropology could be asking those questions about what does health mean in space, particularly on the Moon and Mars, and then also how do we potentially create this new culture on Mars when we've got people from a variety of different backgrounds, not only culturally, but academic backgrounds, places where they were born, experiences that they've had. So the study of anthropology could provide those answers and how to improve communication in this new culture, which could be on Mars.
So we're talking about new culture. So what's up with culture? Because I mean, it's very wide and deep topic at the same time, because you know, and health aspect again, and mitigating those risks, as you're saying, of, you know, injuries and catching a flu, which you know, in Mars it could be a deadly type of scenario, you know, because again, who knows what type of environment that's going to be like. And of course we're talking about kind of insulated space where everybody inside, so everybody can catch the same, and you know, whatever is going to mutate and whatever that's going to be look like. But you know, so how far do you think personal we are from there, you know, like from a personal research where you're looking at right now, people kind of predicting, you know, like Elon Musk and NASA is talking about 40 years, Elon is 20 years. So how far are we ready, let's say physically, mentally, from making something like that happen?
Again, that's another really good question. And what are the kind of the key things that we need to be thinking about at the moment is a selection process of the people that are going to go to the Moon and Mars. But then also after the selection, it's not just that they would be selected on, let's say, on a Friday like today, and then on Monday they're going to go. There would be a period of training about how they can safely not only survive but live in that environment, particularly on Mars, because it takes a long time there, and to a new community there. So that's another important point about how, and sort of where my research is looking at, is how do you train people to operate in that environment. So in terms of a timeline, I mean, I wouldn't bet money on it, but approximately by sort of the middle of this century, I think that we would have a presence on Mars. And certainly by the end of the century, I would predict, slightly look into a crystal ball, but to have a community, an established community on Mars. But there's lots of questions and obstacles that we need to navigate through before we can get to that point.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of obstacles. So what so far, again, because I mentioned a few obstacles from a personal perspective, which is seeing like kind of the biggest obstacle that we're having right now, and what are the ways that maybe, you know, you would suggest from a personal experience that those obstacles can be resolved?
I think that's a really big question, and the first answer that comes to mind is having a collaborative approach. So what I would say is there's lots of different space agencies obviously around the world working on certain projects, but you don't have to be involved in a space agency to contribute towards what we could call a new space age. So I would potentially say to your viewers and listeners that everyone can get involved in space no matter what their professional academic background is. And we need that collaborative approach, particularly from a disaster risk reduction perspective, because the philosophy of disaster risk reduction is about coming together and creating policy and strategy that reduce the risk of disaster for everyone. So I would say collaboration is the short answer to that question.
Yeah, and that's the tough one, right? How do we resolve that? How do we open the borders in our minds, probably more, you know, and how do we collaborate? Because every space agency across the globe have their own personal perspectives of why and how and, you know, when they should make, you know, those missions get accomplished, because everybody has a different time frame because of the different budget and different, again, everything is different. So it's hard for everybody kind of sit down on the same table and say, okay, listen, we came to this conclusion, which is probably going to be one of the toughest parts, because there's a lot of politics and rules and regulations involved into this. So that's I think from a personal perspective, that's why it's going to take so much time, you know, for us to make it happen. But do you personally see, again, with a lot of people now putting a lot of attention on Artemis, you know, moon mission. So do you think kind of moon could be a quicker answer for us to go and create, let's say, a moon base rather than going on Mars? Or do you think kind of we should focus on Mars?
I think focusing on the moon to begin with is a very good step, because obviously it's a little bit closer. It's still very expensive to get there, but we can certainly put things in place on the moon to be able to test whether that would work going to Mars. And that, I think, is sensible because it's a systematic approach. The step before that, about things like analog missions, are a fantastic way of testing hypothesis and engineering inventions or whatever it may be here on Earth before we go to the moon and then ultimately Mars. So, as I say, everyone can get involved in that sense because we can contribute towards space research here on Earth.
Mm-hmm. So how much of the space research do you actually see when it comes from a technology perspective? Because I mentioned some of the technology, probably getting involved into those, those missions, make sure that we can accomplish those missions. And of course, I think there will be some, and I don't think, I kind of know there is some decision-making process that is involved by the technology as well. As I spoke with some people on the podcast, and they mentioned they're going through space, one of the astronaut training programs, and Advanced X, that was, I think, one of the programs. And that's for the people, if you want to go and search this out, you can actually apply to become a commercial astronaut, if you would be able to qualify, because there's, I said, a very high kind of demanding, parts, let's say, on the having the degree and fitness and physical and mental aspects, which hopefully is going to get lowered. But it's a little bit of problem because how do we make those decisions? And again, that AI robot is going to be involved into making those decisions, who's going to become a next commercial astronaut, which I think is very interesting. So how do you see of that kind of machine learning or artificial intelligence based technology involved with the space exploration projects, just like moon mission, and how those can help us, or or not at the same time?
I mean, I'm not a technological expert, but what I would say is that technology can definitely assist us in making some of those decisions. Because there is a counter argument that AI and potentially robots would take away from humanity, but actually it would help it and contribute it, particularly towards working in space. So there are projects about sending robots to Mars to do some of the labor work beforehand, and create a basic structure that we could potentially inhabit. And that's a really classic and good example about how technology can really help our exploration of the moon, Mars, and then potentially deeper into space as well.
Got it. So what do you think? Should we allow a computer, let's say artificial intelligence based technology, let's say to calculate those risks and mitigate those risks? Because again, we as people, again, there are very, very intelligent people working with those space agencies, just like NASA or your ESA. But should we create this type of computer, let's say for the next generation, that could make those difficult decisions for us? Or should be people involved with that?
That's definitely something that could be looked at. I mean, it would be potentially dangerous to be completely reliant on a piece of technology. But I think, again, bringing human intuition and creative thinking together with technology, that would be a very robust way of making those decision-making processes. And again, that's a good question, because it ties into disaster risk reduction again, about how do you make those decisions, and from a health perspective, how do you make clinical decisions in that remote environment? And that's the kind of work that really needs to be thought out much more before we do go to Mars.
Got it. Yeah. So I mean, there is a lot of different information that is missing, because I mean, it's all of it, because my favorite personal quote, and I don't know about yours, maybe you have it, maybe you can share it, but the best math that we can learn is how to calculate our future costs of making current decisions, something like that, basically. So because the current decisions that we're going to make now, based on our personal perspective, knowledge, experience that we have, it's gonna make the future look the way it looks. And again, currently it doesn't look very good, at least would say. So if we're going to continue to make those decisions, and again, Elon Musk, again, like I don't follow him, a lot, but I've seen him talking about kind of creating those Neuralink type of, companies where talking about kind of interlinking human brain with AI type technology so we can make better quality decisions. And I think that's what's lacking with us personally, because I mean, everything is available. Technology, because we have unlimited resources of finances, which of course they're getting, delegated towards different tasks and, different projects because of the decisions that we're making. And we think those are important things. But yeah, how do we come to the conclusion, and how do we all understand, like, okay, this is important and we should go and explore these things? So what you would recommend for people? I mean, because it starts with that one person making that ripple effect. And what would you say to the person like who is watching and never came across, he's just working 9 to 5, having job, family, has bills to pay? Why that person, as you said, should get involved with the space related projects?
I think, as I mentioned earlier on, that space is something that unifies humanity. So joining that conversation is going to be very, very important. And again, it's regardless of people's background. Because eventually, as we do go to Mars, we will need people from different backgrounds completely, from chefs to technicians to economists to lawyers. So people should join those conversations and have an opinion about them, because they are valued. That's one thing I like about the space research industry and that community, because it is very inclusive and collaborative. So that's definitely what I would suggest to people, is just to get involved.
Got it. And you mentioned there are some ways that people can get involved. So can you give a few examples, let's say, for the people who are watching, listening, how they can get involved with anything in that?
Definitely. So organizations like the Space Generation Advisory Council are fantastic. So that's an organization for young people aged 18 to 35 who are interested or are currently researching and working in space industries. It's a fantastic organization that brings together, at the moment, 15,000 members from around the world. So that's a really big community. But it's obviously not the only way. There may be organizations within people's countries that they're listening in. Particularly in the UK, there's UK Space Labs. In Austria, there's the Austrian Space Forum. There are many, many more examples. And then obviously as well, just a really simple example is just to keep reading different sources. So it doesn't have to be academic journals. It could be sort of novels and creative writing. That's where sort of research comes from, is that creative thought and inquisitive nature. So really there's a lot of opportunities for people to get involved in space, even if they're not currently working in the space industry or research.
And what is the website again that you mentioned? The name? Space organization?
The Space Generation Council.
Space Generation Council.
And Space Generation Advisory Council.
Okay, got it. So here we go. So that's for you. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, there's in the UK, there's UK Space Labs, and then there's also Austrian Space Forum, and they're just 3 examples. There are many, many brilliant organizations out there as well. Perfect,
got it. So this is for you who are watching or listening to this. Go and check this out and make sure that you become part of this, because as Myles said, it has to be done. And personally, I'd say that a lot. It's a collaborative effort. I mean, if we are talking about global change, it requires for us personally to start to make that change. We cannot rely on people just like Elon Musk and say, okay, he's going to do everything, so just let him take care of everything, and we're just going to sit and wait, and he's going to come one day, come back from Mars, and he's just going to collect us, say, okay, come here on a spaceship and let's go. That's not going to happen. I mean, it should be, everybody should be involved with this, and at least get some knowledge, information, and at some point become part of these projects. So what do you reckon, should somebody have some sort of degree when they go involved with these projects, just like yourself? Should you be a PhD or a master degree, or like everybody can go and get involved with this?
I think further study is a good way of getting involved, particularly if you want to sort of commit your career to doing that. But that's not to say that you can't get involved in space research and space industries if you don't want to do a degree or a further postgraduate degree in something to do with space. As I say, that we need all types of people when we start to think about going to the moon and Mars. So really, space is something that is for everyone, and everyone can get involved in.
Got it. So I forgot to ask a question because I think it's a very important question also to ask is, there's a lot of passion that I think goes behind that. And I'm pretty sure, there's a passion that you personally have for your own personal research and the projects that you're going through, because that's what's going to keep you, that's what's going to sustain you through those like difficult parts where I'm sure there's a lot of those, especially in the research that you're conducting right now. There's one of those days you wake up and it's like, man, I don't want to do anything. I'm sure that happens, right? If you're not a robot, but how do people get inspired? Can you tell about your personal experience? I mean, was there some sort of a person, event that kind of inspired you to pursue this as well?
I mean, there's so many people that I could mention. I'd be frightened to miss someone out. But I would say there's, you can find inspiration in many things. So as I say, even just finding novels to read if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. But what I would say is just network and talk to people. I mean, earlier today, I was contacted by someone from Portugal who's a doctor in Portugal, and just reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in expedition medicine and space. So we had a Zoom call earlier on, just to chat about different options and what they've done so far. So I think just reach out to people and start talking and join the conversation.
That's a great advice, definitely. Building your personal network. So, I mean, throughout your personal career, what you accomplished so far, would you say like the biggest accomplishments that you currently have?
I think one thing that I'm probably most proud of is finding success out of failure. When I was at school, I wasn't particularly very academic, and I didn't see myself doing a PhD at all. And in fact, when I was doing my A-levels, I said to a particular teacher, I was keen to go to university, and I was struggling at that time. And the advice that I was given was, oh no, Myles, you need to set your sights a little bit lower than that and think about something different, which was obviously quite disheartening to think about at the time. But I kind of used that as a bit of a fuel to push myself further. And then I did end up going to university and did a degree. And it kind of just stems from there, really. And I think in any journey, not just in space or research, there's bound to be setbacks and failures. And that doesn't mean that you're inherently bad at doing those things. It's just a learning experience, and you can turn that around into a positive. So I would say, don't let the bad things or negative experiences deter you from doing something. Turn it into fuel, turn it into energy. And then move forward from that. So that's something that I'm most proud of.
Wow, and I think you should be proud of that, because once you start to understand those things, I mean, life becomes so much easier, because there's a lot of those kind of failing moments in life, and that's what you build on. You build on your personal experience and knowledge, and how to, of course, and through personal network of people, probably some mentoring as well, you can kind of mitigate those risks as well, and kind of take it from 1 year to 3 months because of the other people experience, which is one of the reasons why somebody should have a network of people, so you can ask those questions instead of having your personal experience and going through that and failing or learning, which is, it doesn't make any sense sometimes, but sometimes you need to do your own personal research. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, as well, I don't mind sharing with you and your viewers and listeners, I'm quite dyslexic. So it's labeled as a learning disability. I always find that a very odd thing to say and label that as a disability, because dyslexia and other learning differences are just different ways of thinking. So although that may seem like that's going to hold someone back, it just means I think in a slightly different way to everyone else. I can't spell, but I can certainly think in a different way. So you mentioned earlier on about people that are inspirational. Albert Einstein was dyslexic, and we're still researching his topics of research in the present day. So that's got to be an inspirational story about someone that's changed the world, yet had a learning difference.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, people just like that who have dyslexia, who are making an impact worldwide, again, just like, Albert Einstein, or, people that came to my head, again, Richard Branson, I know that he's dyslexic as well. Virgin Atlantic, and
Exactly.
So there is many examples, that we can take from and say, look, these people had the worst, situations, dyslexia, poor family situations. Nothing was aligned for them, because life never works that way. Especially when it comes to the space projects as well, nothing will be aligned that you will have the financing, you will have people, attention, and everything is going to go well. Look, life will happen, and those scenarios will always happen. Life is just like this. It's like multiple times a day. It's like, is the best, is the worst, and it's like you go through that and kind of try to manage this to make sure that it goes up all the time. But again, there's a lot of different things when it comes to the space and exploration of it. And one of those, again, the conversation that we're having about colonizing Mars and the moon. And I'm sure you have, you get asked that question at least sometime. What is a personal take about, extraterrestrial type, let's say human beings, maybe not talking about kind of bacterial, form, but about a little bit more advanced. Would you think there's something out there or not?
I wouldn't say that I believe or disbelieve in extraterrestrial life. What I would say is that we can't prove or disprove that at the moment. So there's a very curious thought. So what I would say is I'd love for someone to answer that question and find some evidence of potentially life on another planet. So one inquiry at the moment is looking for potential fossilized life on Mars. And that's where, again, is an example where some of the analog missions are looking at how to potentially source them. And we'd look to the profession of geology then to how could we collect some rock samples and look for fossilized life. That's another example how you wouldn't necessarily think geology would be involved in space, but actually that's a huge contribution that the profession of geology can make to space research. So I think it's a possibility. And as I say, I'd love for someone to answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. I would love it for someone to answer that question, which of course, yeah, there's so there's a lot of different things that probably like I'm not asking. And of course you can go and ask personally yourself, Myles, again, on Twitter. He's definitely would be available. I mean, if you have a good enough question, maybe even to jump on a Zoom call, just like with the man that you mentioned, to discuss some important things when it comes to kind of mitigating those risks from a personal kind of health perspective as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different, answers questions that we have that we still didn't answer yet. But I mean, I seen also on Twitter that you're an author and a writer. So do you have any stuff published for people, to kind of learn on as well? And, what should they expect and see?
Yeah, so I published a few journal articles, but a recent text that I published is a textbook about person's care. And I wrote that text for, it's a new nursing profession that we have in the UK called nursing associate. And that book was written primarily for them, but it may be of interest to people that are concerned or would like to know more about how do you provide person-centered care rather than being led by a healthcare practitioner. So that book's being published in January. And then I've also got lots of other articles that I'm currently writing at the moment, which will hopefully be published next year. So being an author and a writer, it's something that I love doing, and I constantly am working on different projects. So another thing that keeps me going.
Exactly. Awesome. And that is awesome. I mean, you being a dyslexic, I mean, being an author and a writer, and, I've seen some books, that you read as well. I see the one that says Extremes, Life, Death, and the Limits of the Human Body by Brian Cox. So can you talk about some of the books, again, like the one that I mentioned, that people maybe the books, maybe the videos, maybe the podcasts, or maybe any type of resources that people can go and start kind of educating themselves?
Brian Cox is a great person to follow. He's produced some really good stuff. Kevin Fong is another person that's written quite extensively about the extremes of the human body. He wrote a book a few years ago about that. I mean, the list is too long, so if people really have a topic that they'd like to know more about, then please just get in touch with me on Twitter, and I can give you some a reading list of different things that you could look at to kind of quench that thirst that you've got.
Got it, got it. Look, from a personal perspective, again, from personal kind of level, because everybody watching right now are listening, and I'm sure you're taking care of your personal body at least at some degree. You know, maybe you go for a run, for a walk, maybe you don't eat at a certain time, and whatever that is, or maybe you don't do none of those things. So, how people should be and why people should take care of their personal bodies. I mean, if you're kind of ready for colonizing Mars and the moon, and maybe going into interstellar kind of dimensions, is there a personal, maybe, physical kind of fitness process, or that you're personally going through, kind of take care of your body, and a mental toughness, kind of build that?
Yeah, that's such an important question. I'm really glad that you asked that. I live in London, but originally I'm on the countryside. So although I've lived in London for nearly 10 years, I still class myself as someone that's from the countryside. So I love being in green spaces outdoors. And I'm very fortunate to live quite close to a park. So during COVID, that's where I've been going, and sort of just walking and running occasionally in the park. And but that's the only way that people can physical health and mental health. And I'm glad you asked that question in that particular way, because for such a long time we've separated in the health world physical health and mental health, but actually they're two sides of one coin. And you can't have good physical health without good mental health. So it's really important for people listening and watching to invest in looking after physical and mental health at the same time. So whether that's just getting outside in, enjoying some green spaces, practicing things like mindfulness, or going for jogging. And then once we eventually get out of COVID, and of course we will get out of COVID, usually you'd find me at least once a month going to some sort of mountainous area of the UK or in Europe, enjoying being in the hills. And again, that's not everyone's cup of tea, but getting involved in different sports is beneficial for both physical and mental health. And for perhaps people that are listening and interested in going to space, that's something that you can really focus on, is making sure that you have good physical and mental health. And if you really wanted to commit to it, exploring how you could be comfortable in a remote or an extreme environment. And mountaineering is a good way of doing that. But obviously, you just need to make sure that you keep yourself safe and go with someone that is experienced and has qualifications to look after people in those environments.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome, definitely. Okay, so on that note, I mean, what's the biggest mountain that you climbed so far, or maybe some future mountain climbing projects that you're looking forward to?
The biggest mountain that I went to is actually a mountain pass in Nepal. And that was part of the Royal Air Force Mountaineering Association celebration 2018 as the Royal Air Force 100 years then. And it was a mountain that not many people have probably heard of, but it's called Tessie Lapcha. That was just over 5,500 meters. It's relatively close to, I'm sure people have heard of. So that's the tallest mountain.
Awesome. So and probably it's one of those, I don't know which one it is, but you can see it on your Twitter kind of cover photo, which it looks pretty scary. It looks pretty scary, but look, I mean, that's what it takes for us. I mean, if we want to kind of conquer the space exploration, if we want to go to Mars, we want to go to moon, and we want to do all these great things when it comes to space exploration, we should personally conquer our fears, our minds, our bodies, and kind of start from there, build it from there, and as quick as we can. So that is awesome. So the last question that I have for you, Myles, again, besides what you're currently working on, I mean, you're halfway through your personal research and a PhD, right now, which everybody, I'm thinking, looking forward to, including myself, seeing the final work. And again, the future projects you're going to be involved with, putting some, articles and writing some stuff, which is awesome. You're getting involved with that. So, I appreciate your personal, again, effort and time, and, the fact that you're putting. You could do probably some other things. You probably could do something, get stuck in a cubicle, or maybe work on some, different projects, and it's going to be kind of, okay, this is what I do. You come back home, you have the weekend, kind of, But you're doing a lot of stuff which is important for now and for the future generation. So again, it's a big thank you, for me personally, for you doing that. But what is your personal take? And do you have a kind of footprint or a legacy that you want to leave behind you as well?
Well, thank you very much for that. Was very nice compliments. I think in terms of a legacy, I mean, what would be fantastic is if somebody takes the research that I'm doing and the publications that will eventually come out as a result of it, and takes that further, even further than I've been able to, that would be fantastic for someone to be able to do that. So I really hope your viewers and listeners are, have that sort of inquisitive nature and potentially like to become a researcher. But again, not necessarily. They might want to contribute in their own way and just get involved. So that would be the legacy that I would love to leave behind.
And that is so beautiful. That's a beautiful legacy to have and build on. And again, just leaving that ripple effect and leaving, because I'm sure this Albert Einstein and the rest of the scientists, they left something that people continue to work from there on their personal projects, and they found something else and they improved it. And that's what it is. Like if you're going to look at the companies that are out there and new startup companies, if we're talking from economical kind of perspective, all these brand new businesses, how we so call them, brand new, they just working on past kind of businesses, but just trying to make them better. And that's what it is. So,
Yeah.
If people can, again, take on your personal research and information and the projects that you put together, if it's a book, an article, again, some scientific project, if you take it from there, kind of, okay, look at it, due diligence, what does it work? What can I implement and make it better? I mean, that's a phenomenal kind of legacy to have, I think. So, yeah, awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Myles, again, for you personally, I want to say again, big thank you for coming over today and sharing personal journey, which I think, again, it's fascinating for you to, being involved with this. I mean, at the young age, well, at least I see that you're being young and, and you're looking to inspire more people at the same time to get involved with this. And, your legacy is phenomenal. So I love that. And I definitely recommend for everybody who's watching or listening, again, go and follow Myles on Twitter, which you're going to find that included in the show notes. Get in contact with him, ask him, questions, ask him the ways that you can become part of some space related projects as well. And one thing that I want to ask you too as well, if you guys share this episode with a friend of yours, again, doesn't have to be any particular friend, just a friend. Because I'm sure that friend will get inspired, from this episode, because there's a lot of great pieces, again, information, inspiration, tips, strategies, how and why people should get involved with space related projects. So again, Myles, thank you again for coming over today. Guys, make sure to share this episode. And as always, I'll see you next time. And don't forget, keep exploring.